A quick recap of where we are to this point. Human beings were created in a lab 250,000 years ago by beings from another planet that enters our system every 3,600 years. We were created for the purpose of slave labor in the gold mines that the off-world beings had established in southern and middle Africa. These beings were the race called the Anunnaki, and in order to make humanity they used DNA from existing creatures, hominoids native to this earth, and DNA from their own species. So we are partly native to this earth and partly native to another planet. As an aside, perhaps this is the reason we have a certain restlessness and yet feel attached to this planet at the same time. And then there are those people who actually feel we do not belong here, and that we are a curse to this planet. In part, they may be right. As a timeline overview, the history that we have is somewhat sketchy for the period of time from our own beginnings, down to a period of time just before the end of the last ice age. This is a period we know existed because of our own scientific study, and recently we have been able to accurately see the timeline by looking at the ice cores taken from the Great Glacier on Greenland. We see a sudden rise in temperature and then a 1,000-year deep freeze and then another sharp rise in temperature. The first rise was about 12,500 years ago, and then the second was about 11,600 years ago. There are those who attribute those temperature anomalies to asteroid impacts on the great ice cap that covered much of North America and was several miles thick over what is now Canada. Without getting into the detail and the massive body of evidence for such a claim, suffice it to say that these events would have had a cataclysmic effect on the Earth, almost a planet-killer series of events. The flood stories that are found everywhere on Earth, in every culture, refer to events from that time, including the account found in Genesis.
To me, it all comes down to this. This, to me, is like, okay, human species on planet Earth, it's time for you to grow up and start paying attention to the bigger picture, because whether you like it or not, you're a part of the bigger picture. And if we finally accept the fact that maybe our predecessors have undergone, in a sense, cultural mass extinctions, it suddenly implies that we can't take our own unending future for granted. That we have to incorporate this bigger picture into our thinking. And, the evidence continues to, yes, like here. This was just from 2011. Multiple lines of evidence for possible human population decline, settlement, reorganization during the early Younger Dryas. Wow. In the 4 years since this was published, more evidence has emerged that, yes, the events that caused the mass extinction of half the great mega-mammals on Earth did not leave the rest of the mammals, the rest of the animals, unscathed, including humans. And there's now emerging evidence, hard scientific evidence, that the human population crashed during the Younger Dryas.
In the discoveries that refer back to the Sumerian civilization, there are accounts that predate the Bible and give a fuller account of the circumstances. We find that the story of Noah is an overconflation of the events of that time. After that event there was the long period of recovery and rebuilding because the area of Mesopotamia, where the original start of the Anunnaki had been, was covered in layers of mud. The high ground near the mountains was the only place where it was possible to grow crops and raise animals for a very long time. This is why we only see the flowering of the Sumerian civilization approximately 7,000 years ago. It took a very long time for the population to recover. The next 5,000 years is likely the most eventful in the coexistence of humanity and the Anunnaki on Earth. Much of what we know of traditional history is from that period, and we find more and more sources to cross-reference what the Sumerian and subsequent civilizations have to say about those times. We have, as well, the event that ended the Sumerian civilization, and the cross-reference to that time in the Bible, and so we can track in parallel what was happening in the biblical history, which is primarily a chronicle of the descendants of Isaac, son of Abraham, and the events of the larger world of the time. What we see is gods and men enmeshed in enmities and wars with each other, mankind fighting for their god in wars against the people of another god. It would seem that the contentions between the Anunnaki spilled over into the human population. If we are warlike today, it is a legacy of the gods or creators. And it is from these times of war between the gods that we later see the rise of the mythologies of the Greek and Roman pantheons of gods. It appears that Nibiru was coming through the sky approximately 500 years before the birth of Christ, give or take some years. We could and should narrow that event down once we are further along in our investigation of our human origins. Suffice to say, the Anunnaki had obtained enough gold by that time and realized as well that it was time for them to turn planet Earth over to us. There are many more details about this history and the Anunnaki themselves that we will touch upon in later posts, but for now we want to see the overall timeline and sketch of who and what we actually are. The first reaction to hearing this, that many people have, including myself, once we realize that the odds of this being the real story of human origins is very, very high, the reaction is to think we must jettison everything that we have been taught and hold dear, particularly with respect to religion and our understanding of a higher being, higher than us and higher than the Anunnaki. But I would suggest we pause, before we go to that extreme, and just hold those previous ideas in suspension, because there is much more to consider than simply the facts of our origins. We may find that in many ways those beliefs are not that far off the mark of where they should be. But we will get to that in due course. Next time we will fill in a few more gaps in the timeline.